Central Highlands, Vietnam, September 1967, 14:30 hours. The ambush was perfect. Textbook VC tactics executed with surgical precision. First platoon, Bravo Company had walked straight into a horseshoe-shaped kill zone, surrounded on three sides by enemy snipers positioned in elevated terrain that gave them overlapping fields of fire and complete visual dominance. Within the first 30 seconds, 4 Marines were dead. Within 2 minutes, 12 more were wounded. And Sergeant Marcus's ghost. Williams knew with cold certainty that unless something changed in the next hour, all 32 men in his platoon would die in this God-forsaken valley. "Contact left! Contact front!" The radio calls overlapped into chaos as Marines dove for whatever cover they could find. Fallen logs, shallow depressions, the bodies of their own dead. But cover only worked if you knew where the enemy was shooting from, and the VC snipers were invisible, their muzzle flashes lost in the dense jungle canopy and afternoon shadows. "Williams, get your squad on that ridge!" Lieutenant Morrison screamed from behind a termite mound, his face twisted with panic and inexperience. He was 23, fresh from officer candidate school, and this was his first real combat. "Assault through the fire. Take that position." Marcus pressed himself flatter against the earth as bullets cracked overhead. "Sir, we assault that ridge. We're dead before we cover 10 meters. We can't even see where they're shooting from." "That's an order, Sergeant." "That's suicide, sir." Another Marine screamed as a bullet found flesh. The VC snipers were picking them apart with patient precision, firing from positions the Americans couldn't locate through the thick vegetation. Marcus had fought in Vietnam for 18 months, had survived a dozen firefights, and he'd never felt this helpless. The enemy could see everything. The Marines could see nothing. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. "Somebody spot those shooters!" Corporal Davis yelled, his voice tight with fear. He was a good kid from Tennessee, 19 years old, and the terror in his eyes said he knew they were trapped. Marcus low-crawled to a better position, scanning the tree line with his rifle scope. 3 VC snipers minimum, maybe more, positioned in a rough arc from northwest to northeast. They were firing in sequence, one shot, then silence while they relocated, then another shot from a different position. Classic counter-sniper tactics designed to prevent return fire and maintain psychological pressure. "I see muzzle flash," Private Chen called out. 2 o'clock, elevated, maybe 80 meters. A shot cracked. Chen jerked backward, blood blooming from his shoulder. The VC sniper had fired at Chen's voice, using sound to locate targets even when visual contact was impossible. "Stay quiet," Marcus ordered. "They're hunting by sound as much as sight." But staying quiet meant dying slowly as the snipers picked them off one by one, and assaulting blindly meant dying quickly in a suicidal charge. They needed a third option, something that would let them locate the enemy positions without exposing themselves to fire. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. The problem was simple. Muzzle flash only lasted microseconds, not long enough for the human eye to register location before it disappeared into the general chaos of combat. By the time you saw the flash, processed where it came from, and aimed to return fire, the shooter had already moved. Unless you could somehow amplify or extend that flash, make it visible for longer, create a way to see what the naked eye couldn't catch. He thought about the gear scattered around his position. C-ration cans, empty ammunition boxes, barbed wire from an old defensive position, and in his pack, a broken signal mirror he'd been meaning to replace. Not much to work with. Just junk, really. But sometimes junk was all you had. "Morrison," Marcus called out, "I need 20 minutes and whatever C-ration cans the men have. I've got an idea." "An idea?" "Williams, we don't have time for ideas. We need to break contact before they kill us all." "Sir, we break contact, they'll chase us down and finish the job. We're in their kill zone. Only way out is through, and we can't fight through if we can't see them." Marcus's voice was steady despite the bullets cracking past his head. "Give me 20 minutes. If it doesn't work, we'll do it your way." Morrison hesitated, caught between training that said never give ground and reality that said his platoon was dying. 20 minutes. Then we assault. Marcus gathered his fire team, Davis, Rodriguez, and Jackson, and explained the concept while bullets tore through the foliage above them. VC snipers are firing from elevated positions. Muzzle flash goes in all directions, but most of it projects forward and upward. If we can position reflective surfaces at angles around our perimeter, we might catch and amplify those flashes, make them visible long enough to locate the shooter. "With what?" Davis asked. "We don't exactly have surveillance equipment. With C-ration cans, cut and polished. Position them like crude mirrors at strategic angles. The inside of the cans is tin-coated, reflective enough to catch light. We create a network of them, each one angled to cover a different sector. When a sniper fires, his muzzle flash hits one of our reflectors and bounces back, making it visible for an extra fraction of a second." Rodriguez stared at him. "Sarge, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You want to build flash detectors out of trash? You got a better idea." "No, but then start cutting cans." They worked with desperate speed, using combat knives to cut C-ration cans into flat sheets, polishing the inside surfaces with dirt and spit until they caught light. Marcus used barbed wire to create mounting frames, positioning the makeshift reflectors at 45-degree angles around their defensive perimeter. Each reflector was aimed at a different section of the surrounding terrain, creating overlapping fields of coverage. "This looks like a junkyard exploded," Jackson muttered, positioning another reflector. "If the brass sees this, they'll think we've lost our minds." "If the brass sees this, it means we're still alive to be court-martialed," Marcus replied. "Keep working." Lieutenant Morrison crawled over, his face showing the strain of watching his platoon bleed out. "Williams, what the hell is that?" "Flash detection network, sir. When the VC snipers fire, their muzzle flash will reflect off these surfaces, amplifying and extending the visual signature long enough for us to locate their positions." "That's..." Morrison searched for words. "That's garbage. Literal garbage. You're building detection equipment out of trash." "Yes, sir." "And you think this will work?" "No, sir. I think it might work, which is better than our current situation, which definitely isn't working." Morrison looked at the network of cut cans and wire, then at his Marines dying in the kill zone, then back at Marcus. "You got 10 more minutes, then we're assaulting that ridge with or without your junk detectors." Marcus positioned the final reflector, checking angles, making sure each one covered its assigned sector. The system was crude, barely functional, probably the stupidest thing he'd tried in 18 months of combat, but it was based on solid physics, light reflection, angle of incidence, amplification through surface bounce. In theory, it should work. In practice, they were about to find out if "should" was enough to keep 30 Marines alive. "Network set," Marcus reported. "Everyone watch your assigned reflector. When you see a flash amplify, call out bearing and distance. Designated marksmen put rounds on that position. The VC won't expect immediate return fire. It'll break their rhythm, make them reconsider their positions." "And if the reflectors don't work?" Davis asked. "Then we die learning something interesting about physics under combat conditions." Central Highlands, Vietnam, 15:05 hours. The VC sniper fired first, a single crack from the northwest sector, the bullet passing close enough to Marcus that he felt the pressure wave. But this time, something different happened. One of his makeshift reflectors, a polished C-ration can mounted on barbed wire, caught the muzzle flash and bounced it back toward the Marine positions. For just a fraction of a second longer than normal, the flash was visible, amplified, locatable. "Northwest, 70 meters, elevated 15 degrees, Marcus called out. "Tree cluster, center mass." 3 Marines opened fire simultaneously, their rounds converging on the called position. There was a brief cry, then the sound of something heavy falling through branches. The VC sniper was either dead or displaced, his perfect hide position compromised by 50 cents worth of trash and some desperate physics. "Holy shit," Rodriguez breathed. "It actually worked." "One down," Marcus said. "Let's get the rest before they figure out what we're doing." The VC snipers adjusted their tactics, trying to fire from positions that wouldn't expose them to the reflector network. But Marcus had positioned his detectors with overlapping coverage. Every angle was monitored by at least 2 reflectors. When the second sniper fired from the northeast, a different reflector caught the flash. Northeast, 65 meters, elevated 20 degrees. More return fire, another displaced or eliminated sniper. The VC advantage was evaporating, their invisible positions becoming visible through the crude but effective detection network. What had been a one-sided slaughter was becoming a real fight. Lieutenant Morrison watched in disbelief as his platoon transformed from helpless targets into active hunters. "Williams, how the hell did you know this would work?" "Didn't know, sir. Just understood that muzzle flash is light. Light reflects off surfaces, and reflected light can be seen. The VC snipers rely on being invisible. We made them visible. Simple physics applied to a tactical problem. There's nothing simple about building surveillance equipment out of garbage during a firefight." "Respectfully, sir, there's nothing complicated about it either. Just practical application of available materials." Marcus adjusted one of his reflectors, fine-tuning its angle. "The complicated part is getting people to take the idea seriously before testing it. Most officers would have dismissed this as crazy talk from an NCO who doesn't know his place." The implication hung in the air between them, that a black sergeant's ideas were doubly likely to be dismissed, once for his rank and once for his race. Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, Williams, I'm glad I gave you those 20 minutes. So am I, sir. Dead sergeants can't say, 'I told you so.'" Over the next 30 minutes, the reflector network helped locate and suppress 6 more VC sniper positions. The enemy, realizing their advantage was lost, began withdrawing. By 1600 hours, the kill zone was silent, except for the moans of wounded Marines and the calls for medics. First Platoon had survived, 28 men still breathing out of the original 32, impossible odds made possible by cut cans and wire, and a sergeant who refused to accept that dying was inevitable just because the enemy had better positions. "Casualty report," Morrison ordered, his voice shaky with relief and exhaustion. 4 KIA, 8 wounded, sir," Corporal Davis reported. "Could have been 32 KIA if Sergeant Williams hadn't—" He gestured at the reflector network, still standing like strange metal flowers growing from the jungle floor. "If Sergeant Williams hadn't built detection equipment out of garbage," Morrison finished. "Yeah, I'm aware." He looked at Marcus, really looked at him for maybe the first time since taking command. "You saved this platoon, Williams. Saved my career too, probably. A green lieutenant losing his entire platoon in his first combat action. That's not something you come back from." "Just did my job, sir." "Your job is to follow orders. What you did was think your way out of an impossible situation using materials that nobody would consider tactical assets." Morrison paused. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star, and I'm writing a detailed after-action report about this reflector network. Other platoons need to know this technique exists." "Sir, with respect, other platoons need to know that solutions don't always come from the manual. Sometimes they come from looking at what you have, even if it's just junk, and figuring out how to make it solve your problem." "That's not how the army usually works." "No, sir, but maybe it's time it did." "Nota, corrigi para." "No, sir. But maybe it should be. Com base no texto original, pois parece que você fez uma pequena alteração na cópia." They held position through the night, establishing a defensive perimeter and calling in medevac for the wounded. Marcus kept his reflector network in place, monitoring for any sign of VC return. But the enemy had learned their lesson. The Americans could see them now, and that changed everything. At dawn, a Huey arrived with a captain from Battalion Intelligence. He walked the perimeter, examining the reflector network with the intensity of someone trying to understand alien technology. "You built this?" he asked Marcus. "This detection system?" "Yes, sir. C-ration cans, barbed wire, basic understanding of light reflection. It's brilliant. Crude, but brilliant." The captain made notes on a clipboard. "We've been trying to develop counter-sniper detection equipment for months, spent thousands on R&D, and you did it with garbage, for basically free. Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones, sir." "Simple?" The captain laughed without humor. "Sergeant, there's nothing simple about seeing a tactical application for trash that every other soldier in Vietnam just throws away. That's innovation. That's the kind of thinking that wins wars." He paused. "Why hasn't anyone else thought of this?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Maybe they did, sir. Maybe they just didn't think anyone would take it seriously if they proposed it. Easy to dismiss ideas that come from unexpected places. Easier to stick with standard doctrine than risk looking foolish suggesting something unconventional." The captain met his eyes, understanding the subtext. "And as a Black NCO, your ideas are probably dismissed more often than most." "I didn't say that, sir." "You didn't have to." The captain closed his notebook. "Well, for what it's worth, Battalion is taking this seriously. We're going to test your reflector system, refine it, possibly distribute it to other units. You've created something that could save a lot of lives." "Just wanted to save my platoon, sir. The rest is bonus." Over the next week, the stories spread through the battalion, then the brigade, then the entire division. The sergeant who saved his platoon with junk. The trash detectors that broke a VC ambush. Some versions were accurate, others were exaggerated. But all of them carried the same core message. Innovation could come from anywhere, even from people and places the system didn't expect. Marcus received his Bronze Star in a ceremony attended by his platoon and several officers who'd never spoken to him before the ambush. The medal was nice. The recognition was awkward. But what mattered was that his Marines had survived, and other Marines might survive future ambushes because someone had proven that C-ration cans could be tactical assets if you were desperate and creative enough. "Sarge," Davis said after the ceremony, "you think they'll really implement this? Make it standard gear?" "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "Too simple. The Army likes complicated solutions that come from laboratories and cost money. But some smart NCOs will remember the story and improvise their own versions when they need them. And that's enough. That's how real innovation spreads, not through official channels, but through soldiers teaching soldiers what actually works in the field." "Still wish you'd get more credit." "Credit doesn't keep people alive, Davis. Technique does. As long as the technique survives and spreads, I don't care who gets credit." But privately, Marcus knew the truth. The reflector network would be refined by engineers, tested by officers, and eventually documented in field manuals, with his name buried in footnotes, if mentioned at all. That was how the system worked. Ideas flowed up from the enlisted ranks, but credit flowed down from the officer corps. And if you were black, your ideas had to work twice as well to get half the recognition. Still, 28 Marines were alive who shouldn't be. That was worth more than any medal, any recognition, any credit. That was the real victory, not the Bronze Star, but the breathing men around him who'd seen their sergeant look at garbage and see salvation, who'd learned that innovation didn't require advanced degrees or official approval, just practical thinking and the willingness to try ridiculous things when conventional wisdom offered nothing but death. The reflector network came down piece by piece as 1st Platoon prepared to move out. Marcus kept one of the original C-ration reflectors, a battered piece of tin and wire that had helped save his platoon. It wasn't much to look at, just junk, really. the kind of thing anyone would throw away without a second thought. But Marcus knew better. He knew that sometimes junk was the most valuable thing you had, as long as you were creative enough to see its potential and brave enough to use it when everyone else said it was worthless. Firebase Alpha, Vietnam. October 1967. Word of Marcus's reflector network spread faster than official channels could contain it. Within 3 weeks, 7 different units had improvised their own versions, each one adapted to local conditions and available materials. Some used polished metal from damaged equipment. Others experimented with angled mirrors salvaged from vehicles. One creative corporal in Charlie Company created a version using aluminum foil from meal packages. But the official response was predictably bureaucratic. Division wanted standardization, testing protocols, engineering analysis. They wanted to take Marcus's desperate field improvisation and turn it into proper military equipment with specifications, manufacturing contracts, and supply chain integration. "They're going to ruin it," Marcus told Davis one evening while manning perimeter watch. "Take something that works because it's simple and cheap, then make it complicated and expensive. Maybe that's good, Sarge. Better equipment means more lives saved. Better equipment means months of development, millions in contracts, and by the time it's issued, the war's evolved past needing it." Marcus adjusted his makeshift reflector. He still carried one, despite having access to newer designs. The genius of the trash detector wasn't the technology. It was that any soldier could build one in 20 minutes with materials they already had. You standardize it, you lose that flexibility. A week later, Marcus was summoned to division headquarters in Da Nang. The meeting room was full of officers and civilian contractors, all studying enlarged photographs of his reflector network like archaeologists examining alien artifacts. "Sergeant Williams," a major began, "we've been analyzing your counter-sniper detection system. Very innovative. We'd like to develop an official version for field deployment." "Sir, with respect, it doesn't need development. It already works. Any soldier with a knife and some C-ration cans can build one in the field." "Yes, but we can improve it. Better materials, standardized angles, integrated mounting systems." "That costs money and time, sir. My version costs nothing and takes 20 minutes. The major's expression hardened. "Sergeant, the Army doesn't issue equipment based on what's cheap. We issue equipment based on what's effective and reliable." "Mine is both, sir. 28 Marines are alive because it worked under the worst possible conditions. Your version is crude, unrefined, not suitable for Army-wide deployment." Marcus felt the familiar weight of dismissal, the subtle message that his idea was good enough to save lives, but not good enough to be taken seriously by the system. "So you will spend 6 months and $1 million developing something sophisticated that does exactly what 50 cents of trash already does." "We'll develop something that meets military specifications," the major corrected coldly. "That's how professional armies operate, Sergeant. Not with improvised junk, but with proper equipment." The meeting ended badly. Marcus returned to his unit, knowing that his simple, effective solution would be improved into something expensive and complicated that would arrive too late to help most of the soldiers who needed it. But the soldiers themselves didn't wait for official approval. The trash detector spread through unofficial channels, taught by NCOs to NCOs, refined through practical experience rather than laboratory testing. By December 1967, an estimated 200 units across Vietnam were using some version of Marcus's reflector network. Lives were being saved with garbage and ingenuity, regardless of what division thought about proper military specifications. Lieutenant Morrison, now promoted to captain after successfully commanding the platoon, tried to fight the bureaucracy. "Sir, Sergeant Williams' system is already deployed and working," he argued at a staff meeting. "Why reinvent something that's proven effective? Because it's unsightly, unprofessional, and not suitable for the modern army," a colonel responded. We're not a ragtag militia building weapons from scrap. We're the United States military, and we issue proper equipment. Even if that proper equipment arrives too late to save soldiers who need it now, Captain, you're dismissed. Morrison left the meeting furious and helpless, understanding for the first time what Marcus had known all along. The system protected itself before it protected soldiers. Innovation that came from unexpected sources was threatening, especially when it suggested that expensive official solutions weren't always better than cheap improvised ones. "They're not going to adopt it, are they?" Morrison asked Marcus later. "No, sir. They'll develop something expensive that does the same thing, call it official doctrine, and take credit for solving a problem I already solved. That's how it works." "That's not right." "No, sir, but it's reality. At least the soldiers know the technique now. They'll keep using it, regardless of what the brass decides. And that's what matters, keeping Marines alive, not getting official recognition." In January 1968, Division unveiled their optical flash detection system, a sophisticated array of precisely angled mirrors in machined aluminum housings, each unit costing $47 and requiring specialized mounting equipment. It worked well. It was also completely unnecessary, doing exactly what Marcus's 50-cent version did, just with better aesthetics and a supply chain that couldn't keep up with demand. "Congratulations, Sarge," Rodriguez said sarcastically when they saw the official version. "They took your idea, made it expensive, and you get none of the credit." "Don't need credit," Marcus replied. "Just need soldiers to stay alive." But the slight stung anyway. His name appeared nowhere in the official documentation. The Bronze Star citation mentioned innovative tactical thinking, but nothing about the specific technique. And when training manuals were updated with counter-sniper procedures, the trash detector was listed as unofficial field expedient method, while the expensive official version received full technical specifications and diagrams. "It's because you're black," Davis said bluntly one night. "If a white officer had invented this, they'd name it after him. But a Black NCO, best you can hope for is a footnote." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "Or maybe the system just doesn't like ideas that make it look foolish for not thinking of them first. Either way, I'm not fighting that battle. I'm fighting the war." His tour ended in March 1968. Marcus rotated back to the States with his Bronze Star, his trash detector memento, and the quiet knowledge that he'd saved lives the official system couldn't or wouldn't. No parade, no special recognition. Just another sergeant going home after doing his job. But he carried something more valuable than recognition, the proof that genius didn't require credentials or approval, just practical thinking and the courage to try ridiculous things when conventional wisdom failed. He'd looked at garbage and seen salvation. He'd proposed something absurd and made it work. And dozens of soldiers were alive because he hadn't let dismissal stop him from trying. Fort Benning, Georgia, 1995. The infantry school auditorium was packed with officer candidates, young men and women preparing to lead soldiers into whatever conflicts the future held. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, now retired and working as a tactics instructor, stood at the podium with a battered C-ration can in his hand. "This," he began, holding up the can, "saved my platoon's lives in Vietnam. Who can tell me how?" Silence. The candidates stared at the trash in his hand, confused. "I'll tell you how," Marcus continued. "September 1967, my platoon walked into a perfect VC ambush, snipers in elevated positions, complete visual dominance, picking us off one by one. We couldn't see them, couldn't locate them, couldn't fight back. So I cut up C-ration cans, polished them, mounted them on wire, and created crude flash detectors that amplified muzzle flashes long enough for us to locate and suppress enemy positions." He proceeded to tell the story, The kill zone, the desperate improvisation, the ridicule, the success. The candidates listened with growing attention. The official army response was to spend 6 months and substantial money developing a proper version that did exactly what my 50-cent trash detector already did, Marcus said. Which tells you something important about military bureaucracy. It values process over results, credentials over creativity, and expensive solutions over cheap ones, even when the cheap solution works better. A candidate raised her hand. "Sir, are trash detectors still in use?" "No. The official version was phased out in the 80s when better technology became available. But the lesson remains. Don't wait for perfect solutions when improvised ones will save lives now. Use what you have. Think creatively. And don't let anyone tell you an idea is worthless just because it doesn't come through official channels." Another candidate spoke up. "Sir, the after-action reports from that period don't mention trash detectors. They mention optical flash detection systems developed by division." "Of course they do," Marcus said without bitterness. "History gets written by officers and bureaucrats, not by the NCOs who actually innovate in the field. My name doesn't appear in the official record. The technique I invented got credited to the system that tried to prevent it. That's normal. That's expected. But that's not fair." "No, it's not, but fairness isn't the point. Effectiveness is. My trash detector saved 28 lives. That matters more than whose name appears in the history books." Marcus set down the can. Besides, the real story spread the way most real military knowledge spreads, NCO to NCO, soldier to soldier, through informal networks that share what actually works, rather than what's officially approved. After class, a black lieutenant approached him. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Do you think your idea was dismissed initially because of your race? Because you were a black sergeant proposing something unconventional?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think my idea was dismissed for multiple reasons. Because I was enlisted, not an officer. Because it looked ridiculous before it was proven effective. Because it challenged the assumption that good solutions require expensive development. And yes, probably because I was black, and the system in 1967 was even less interested in listening to black soldiers than it is now." He paused. "But here's what I learned. You can't control whether people dismiss you. You can only control whether you let their dismissal stop you from trying." "That's not a satisfying answer, sir." "No, it's not. But it's an honest one. Change happens slowly. The military today is more open to diverse voices than it was in my time. But you'll still face dismissal, still encounter bias, still have your ideas judged, partly on your skin color, rather than purely on their merit. What you do with that reality determines whether you become another statistic or whether you change things for the next generation." The lieutenant nodded slowly. "Did it ever get easier? Being underestimated?" "No, but I got better at proving people wrong. And eventually that's almost as satisfying as being taken seriously from the start." That evening, Marcus drove home through Georgia countryside, thinking about the young black lieutenant and all the other soldiers who'd faced the same battles he'd fought. Not just against enemy forces, but against systems that undervalued their contributions. He thought about the trash detectors that had saved lives but received no official recognition. About innovation that succeeded despite bureaucracy rather than because of it. The C-ration can sat on his passenger seat, battered and dented, a memorial to desperate improvisation and the stubborn refusal to accept that death was inevitable just because official solutions didn't exist. He'd kept it for 27 years, carrying it through promotions and deployments and finally into retirement. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable things looked like garbage right until the moment they saved everyone's lives. His phone rang. A former soldier from his Vietnam platoon, calling like they did every few months to maintain the bonds forged in that kill zone 3 decades ago. "Marcus, you teaching those officer candidates about the trash detectors?" Davis asked. "Every chance I get. Someone needs to tell them the real story since it's not in the official records." Still bitter about that? No, just determined that the next generation learns the lesson, that innovation can come from anywhere, that genius doesn't announce itself with credentials, that sometimes the best solution costs 50 cents and looks ridiculous right until it works. Think they'll listen? Marcus thought about the candidates' faces, their questions, their engagement with a story that challenged everything the official military narrative told them about where good ideas came from. Some will, he said, and that's enough. That's how change happens, not through official channels, but through one soldier at a time learning that the system doesn't have all the answers, that creativity matters more than credentials, and that sometimes you save lives with junk because junk is what you have when perfect solutions are months away and people are dying now. Still the same stubborn bastard I remember, Davis said with affection, never letting the system tell you what's possible. Someone has to. Otherwise, the next generation thinks innovation only comes from laboratories and officer decisions. They need to know it also comes from desperate sergeants looking at garbage and seeing possibility. They talked for another hour, reminiscing about the platoon, the war, the trash detectors that had become legend among the soldiers who'd used them even as official records erased their existence. And when Marcus hung up, he felt the same satisfaction he'd felt in that Vietnamese kill zone 3 decades ago. The knowledge that he'd done something that mattered, that he'd saved lives the system couldn't or wouldn't, and that the truth would survive, even if official history tried to bury it. The C-ration can sat on his desk at home now, polished to a shine, mounted on a plaque with a simple inscription: "Innovation doesn't require permission, it requires courage." Students and fellow instructors often asked about it, and Marcus always told the story: the kill zone, the trash detector, the lives saved, the recognition denied, the lesson learned. He told it not for credit or vindication, but because the next generation needed to know that genius existed in unexpected places, that a black sergeant could see solutions white officers missed, that 50 cents of garbage could be worth more than $1 million of official development, that sometimes the most important thing a soldier could do was refuse to accept that problems were unsolvable just because the manual didn't have answers. The trash detector had saved 28 lives in 1967, but its real legacy was the lesson it taught: that innovation belonged to everyone, that creativity didn't require credentials, and that the most ridiculous ideas were sometimes the only ones worth trying, especially when conventional wisdom offered nothing but death and officials offered nothing but dismissal. Marcus Williams went to bed that night thinking about the young black lieutenant, about all the soldiers who'd faced their own kill zones and impossible situations, and about whether they'd remember the story of the sergeant who saved his platoon with junk. Some would, and they'd look at whatever garbage surrounded them with new eyes, seeing not waste, but possibility, not trash, but salvation. And maybe, just maybe, they'd refuse to let anyone tell them their ideas were worthless just because they came from unexpected places or looked ridiculous before being proven. Maybe they'd be stubborn enough, creative enough, desperate enough to try anyway. That was Marcus's real legacy, not a medal or official recognition, but the proof that genius could come from anywhere and save lives with anything, even 50 cents of junk, and the courage to use it when everyone else said it was impossible. The trash detector had worked, the platoon had survived, the lesson lived on, and in the end, that was worth more than any recognition the system could have given, because it changed not just one battle, but how future soldiers thought about innovation, improvisation, and the value of ideas that looked like garbage, right until they saved everyone's lives.